Did you ever notice the anti-romantic subplot in Ghost in the Shell? There's this dynamic where Batou has a bit of a crush on Major Kusanagi, but the Major doesn't reciprocate his feelings in any way whatsoever. And I want to tell you a little bit about how this works because it's such a great representation of the techniques that Ghost in the Shell uses to develop Major Kusanagi's character. So for example, during the movie's famous diving scene, the Major kind of just casually removes her diving suit right in front of Batou as they're having a conversation. And she doesn't see anything strange about this, it's just as though she's in a locker room. But the movie draws our attention to how remarkable this is because Batou reacts differently. When he realizes what she's doing, he diverts his gaze. And so he's the only one in this situation who really consciously sees the Major as naked. And her nakedness even disrupts his ability to carry on the conversation because he's just about to make an important point when he diverts his gaze, but then he just gets kind of flustered. And if you take this scene in isolation, it may not mean a whole lot, but there's another scene where this same dynamic kind of repeats itself. There's an action sequence where the Major has to remove her clothes in order to use her optical camouflage, which basically makes her invisible. And at the end of the sequence, after she defeats the enemy, when she turns off the camo and becomes visible again, she kind of just stands around in public essentially nude, because she has to wait there with Batou for backup to arrive to take away the perp that she just apprehended. But Major Kusanagi truly does not acknowledge that she's nude at all, just like in the diving scene. Her behavior resembles the innocence of Adam and Eve, who walked naked in the Garden of Eden but did not grasp the very fact that they were naked. At least not until they ate the fruit of the tree of knowledge. But Batou is a little bit different here. He has eaten the fruit, and he does acknowledge the nakedness of Major Kusanagi. And in a friendly but also somewhat paternalistic gesture, he approaches her to drape a coat around her shoulders in order to clothe her. And I think what's happening here is that Batou represents the male gaze, which eroticizes Major Kusanagi's body and therefore sees her as naked or nude. But the movie then contrasts this male gaze with Major Kusanagi's own perspective, which, as I suggested earlier, represents a kind of biblical innocence. Major Kusanagi has effectively escaped the male gaze, and it plays no role in the governance of her life and behavior. She's completely alienated from the very idea of sexuality, and thus the notion that she might be naked never once makes it into her field of conscious concerns. And the thing we have to remember here is that the Major doesn't have a biological body at all. She's been cybernetically enhanced, and all that remains of her original body is her brain. Everything else is a military-grade prosthetic. And so the reason the Major doesn't feel connected to the nakedness of her body is because she doesn't feel connected to her body at all. Certainly at the end of the movie, she chooses to abandon her body because she fuses her consciousness into an artificial intelligence, which in turn allows her to digitize her existence entirely. And I think that Ghost in the Shell helps us to make sense of the Major's final decision to abandon her body altogether, partly by showing us the scenes that I mentioned earlier, which exhibit the way in which the Major has abandoned all conscious concern for the socially constructed ideas of nakedness, sexuality, and shame of one's body in the biblical sense. These are just aspects of a broader trend in which the Major increasingly severs the ties between her identity and her body.